All right, welcome to Black Doctors Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tamara Hill, and today I'm joined by Dr. Donald Garner. Dr. Garner, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hill, for that hearty introduction, and I'm so excited to be joining this conversation with you this evening. Very excited.
I have a myriad of questions that I want to ask you because I'm intrigued by your research about Black and brown male achievement, so let's get into it.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay, so how did education influence you in your childhood, and what led you to choosing a life in academia?
So, I grew up I was born in Houston, Texas, by way of Ocala, Florida. So I grew up on a quaint but very large farm with cows, horses, and chickens, and church was the epicenter of our community. And so I had a pretty much fortunately a fairy tale type of childhood and upbringing wherein, education was reinforced on every side. So I want to, for those who are listening right now, I really want to highlight some unsung heroes. I grew up around, grandparents and uncles and aunts who had an 8th grade education, a 6th grade education, and they still reinforce the power of education. So that narrative of me going to school and making something of myself was expressed with people with very little education. And then when I got into the schooling, system throughout, middle, elementary, and high school, it was reinforced. And so I was actually, in a very beautiful place where all around me, the adult figures, just expressed the value of education. And subsequently, I just kept flourishing and moving forward in that regard. So that's how I would say what got me to the place academically as to where I am right now.
I can appreciate what you're saying because I'm a Southern girl,
from
Arkansas, and so I had the same upbringing. My grandfather had a 6th grade education. My grandmother had a 3rd grade education. So we're kindred spirits in that, and the understanding that education would change your life. And so I really connect with you on that point. Okay, so think back to when you were a young man, and what did you experience as you transitioned from being an undergraduate to a graduate student? What were your experiences like?
Yeah, so I think the most glaring experience was me realizing the power that I had to really cultivate, curate my educational experiences as a graduate student compared to being an undergraduate. So, for example, I did a double master's in public administration and social work at Florida State University. And I didn't realize once I got into the program that I was able to really, start hand selecting different classes that I could take as it related to my professional interests. And being an undergraduate, being an undergrad, you're so, well, for the most part, we're so fixated on, being social, being on the scene, pledging. I did all of that, right?
Parties.
And so parties, and I did it very, very, very well, right? And so that competes with you feeling like you can control your educational experience. You can just kind of take whatever is given to you. So I think that was a defining moment where, through a lot of advisement, I realized that I could control and influence what my education would look like as a grad student compared to, being an undergrad.
That makes sense. And because I think a lot of our undergraduates, whether they be male or female, they come to college and it's like, the parties, the games, homecoming, and they lose the focus of, I'm here to get my education, because the 4 years will pass by quickly and you will still be at the freshman stage and your friends will be walking across the stage. So
trying to tell you,
that is a realistic expectation.
Right.
So do you think that the lack of social programs for youth, and in particular, Black and brown males, has led to the decrease in numbers of them seeking higher education? And I say this because as an instructor myself, when I walk in a classroom, there are always more young Black women than there are young Black males.
Yeah.
And so I've been in a situation just once in my career where it's the opposite at Edward Waters, but now every situation I walk into, there are more young Black women than there are Black males. And so I just want to get your take on what has led to that decrease in numbers.
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think, when I heard social programs, I think it's important for us to first unpack, what we mean by that, right? So I think social programs as developed by churches, social programs as developed by, nonprofit organizations in local communities, and even social programs as developed by, our public charter schools in the after school sector, right? So I think, when I think about, social programs, that is a supplement to what students are getting, in the everyday education experience. So I do think that there is a correlation for sure in terms of, in terms of there being a lack of social programs and why, young men of color are not pursuing education. Here's why. I think social programs, they offer, exposure, right? And they offer encouragement. And I believe they offer a profound degree of expectation setting.
And discipline.
And discipline, right? And so, without getting into the weeds, because I know we have a lot to unpack, exposure / encouragement / expectations. I believe social programs, they help to amplify the narrative, about why education is so important and why, just seeing different things creates a different portal, for you to see the world. And I believe all of those experiences gets a young man, even a young woman, to a point where they believe that pursuing higher education is possible and necessary. So absolutely, you can almost guarantee if a community is experiencing a void of social programs, you will probably see, a decrease in number of students, even feeling like education is something that they should do. Because the reality is our schools cannot do everything, teachers cannot do it. I know we say teachers are mentors, social workers, parents, but we don't ask doctors to be all of those things, and so the reality is schools need help, and if they don't have those extra supplemental programs in place, to support our students, I just think it does, contribute to the decline for sure.
And I do think, to your point, I think about Denzel Washington, who said when he was a young man and he was doing things he had no business, his mother put him into the boys club.
Yeah.
And so now, in 2020, he's given so much back to the boys club because it gave him so much structure and discipline and a place to go and to, I guess, relieve those energies he had.
Absolutely.
As a young man.
Absolutely.
And so now you see the product of, he could have went in a certain direction.
Yeah.
But the boys club turned that around. And also think about the South Side of Chicago and the young men who are involved in gangs. If they have an outlet, what are the possibilities? Because what they see around them, to your research, is what they know and what they think of as success.
Absolutely.
They don't think of going to school as being, oh, that's going to be successful. I can do what I do and take care of my business. But what are the possibilities? Either jail or death, an early death at that. Right. So it's very much what you said about the lack of social programs, and it's not just about the church, it's about the entire community, making sure that these young men, Black and brown males, as you call them, are on the right track, and they need that either that firm hand or that guidance. Yes. So my next question is, while we are aware that beyond the funding that is necessary for prison reentry programs to be affordable in the community, there's also a strong urgency to provide mental health services for the participant. What is your take on that? Because just recently, Taraji P. Henson talked about, her issues with depression, and more African Americans are coming about talking about mental health services, because you're from the South and you probably heard the term of, oh, there's nothing wrong with that person. She just touched in the head, put it on the porch, put him on the porch on Sunday.
Yeah.
And I say this because I have heard this in my own family, and the failure to acknowledge that this person has schizophrenia or manic depressive, that's an issue. So when somebody comes out of prison, how do you deal with their mental health issues? Because it is not just a physical presence, it's the mental presence that they have to deal with coming back into society.
Yeah, man, powerful question, Dr. Hill. So I know we'll get into this towards as we continue to converse. My dissertation in particular, examined the role in which the role that social support played in helping men transition from prison to the community. And so specifically though, as a research assistant, I did work with the Beck Institute for Religion and Poverty, and we had this organization called the Interfaith Assembly on Homelessness and Housing contact us and asked us to evaluate a program that had been in place for 27 years without, evaluation. And so my chair, my then, who became my chair, and two other research assistants came together. And what we started seeing in the earlier stages of our work was that life skills empowerment was happening. But we realized after talking with these men, coming home from prison, that much more was needed, right? And so our program model even evolved into making it trauma informed. And this was after, again, speaking with people coming home from prison, speaking with directors who are doing this work. And we realized that, we can't do this work effectively if it's not, trauma informed. And so what I learned and still learning as a scholar is, how do we pay attention to, the many dimensions of well-being? And so I do believe that, there is a dire urgency for mental health services. And in fact, you cannot do any work with any vulnerable population if you don't have any consideration and build capacity for, checking one's mental health and overall well-being. And I think I like well-being because, it accounts for, individualistic, an individualistic lens. It accounts for social, it accounts for emotional, et cetera, et cetera. So absolutely, I cannot overstate the importance of mental health services for beyond funding for reentry programs and the like.
But and to your point, is so important in the Black community, because as I said before, we tend to ignore it or brush it off. And unfortunately, many people who go to prison, some of them have mental health issues and they're not addressed. And so when they come out and they enter the reentry programs, it only
exacerbates
the problem, right? And so if you have it, it's like Rick James said years ago, he's like, I got more drugs in jail than I did on the street. And that's the absolute truth. And so if I'm not solving the problem, I'm exacerbating it to the point that I'm not solving it. I'm not helping this person, because as we know, there's a constant cycle that I'm going right back because I keep doing the same thing that I did before. And I think that, like you said, beyond the funding, as I asked you before, we have to address these issues because everybody's situation is individual. And we can't just group them all and say, okay, they're crazy or they're having these issues, or is each case is individual. And we have to look at what's happening, how we can address it, and what it's going to take to resolve it.
I want to add just really quickly, Dr. Hill, to what you just said. Very critical in my research, and I talked about this, my dissertation really lightly in the sense that a lot of reentry programs and the way prison reentry is understood is that it still relies on the assumption that, individuals have their own capacity to change, their disposition, which is largely true. What I did though, and so a lot of programs that we see is about like changing criminogenic thinking. So if your thinking changes, then, especially in the criminology world, it's the assumption that you can then change your entire lot in life. And what I discovered from a social work lens is that one of the most powerful forms of changing, especially from a mental health perspective, is rooted and done in community. Right. And so a lot of my work, even when I talk about mental health, I try to always include a community-centered lens, when discussing how to improve, the plight of one's mental health, because even from the men and women that I worked with, I saw how close relationships, help to boost, one's sense of meaning and well-being and the whole 9 yards. So I wanted to really add that piece, because that is a critical finding that I saw, from the work that I've done and plan to continue to do in the near future.
And as you speak about the community, you're right. If I come out and I'm back in the same community that fostered my criminology, I'm not going to do well. That's just a given, because it won't take long until I do something that I have no business and I'm back in jail. And so you're right, the community has to change in the relationships that are being fostered for those who re-entered. So a part of your research focuses on the Black and brown male achievement. And what ways do you think we can dismantle the prison pipeline so that more Black and brown males can be successful or productive despite mass incarceration and racism? Because right now we're dealing with this issue of Black males and brown males being the largest majority of people who are incarcerated in the federal system and the state system. And sometimes it is for the most minute crime. So how do you perceive that we dismantle that? Because we know that there's a school to pipeline prison system. And so what are your ideas on how we dismantle that to keep that from happening?
Such a loaded question. I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and just for the purposes of brevity, and I know our listeners are out here, trying to figure out what can be done as well. So, my quick 2 cents on it are a couple of things. So one, I feel very strongly about having a space for ongoing. Let me say it different. I feel like we should always have a space to change the public perception and the narrative of young men of color, Black and brown males in particular. So what I mean by that is, there being some resources, some funding, dedicated to grappling with the public media about how Black and brown young men are perceived and understood. We can't even do any practical works if we don't continue to dismantle how people think about us in the first place. So again, if someone is listening to this podcast and trying to figure out, okay, what is Dr. Garner saying? Even if we had a contract with a advertising agency, where we're constantly promoting the positive representations of young men of color, where we're constantly promoting just the holistic nature of what it means to be a young man of color, would be ideal, right? So I don't even think it's always about promoting positivity. I think it's about promoting, like I said, the reality of how multifaceted, young men of color are, even young women of color are, instead of us being perceived constantly as brutes and aggressive and monsters and the whole 9 yards. So that's one thing. And I think that type of work has to be concurrent as we're building public and policy, efforts to get to the more, practical side. So from a practical lens, I think in terms of dismantling the school to prison pipeline. So you may know I do consulting for the Eagle Academy for Young Men. And so for those of you who do not know who Eagle is, look us up, eafny.org. Eagle Academy for Young Men is the tallest order and of having public schools comprised of 6th to 12th grade for young men of color. And we are based in New York City. 5 schools in all of the boroughs and 1 in Newark, New Jersey. And we're educating 3,000 young men of color. We have over 1,400 alums across the country and world.
Wow.
And we have a very powerful model, PACER M, parent involvement, parent engagement, academic excellence, college and career readiness, extended day learning, rituals, and mentoring. And so Eagle Academy, and, you know, I won't get into the weeds of our data. You know, we'll have links if you all are interested in finding and learning about us. But Eagle, to me, Dr. Hill, is what I believe is continuously needed to dismantle this pipeline, because I just feel like in the traditional public school model, many of our young men of color get lost in the shuffle. Right.
I have to agree.
I am considered, Dr. Hill, an exception to the rule. It wasn't until I got to college that I saw, you know, how I was able to even critique exceptionalism. Right. But that's a whole nother conversation. I believe on average, if there were more spaces to educate young men of color that root them in culture, and they're in a culture of care. They're in this continuity of care and love, in addition, you know, to the hardcore skills that are required to ensure that they're reading and writing effectively and thinking effectively. That will dismantle the prison to school, the school to prison pipeline. I know education is one lens, right? We know that there's other assets and aspects that are required, but just in the work that I do, I believe education is that proverbial equalizer that can really set a young man of color on a different trajectory, other than what he might, you know, not have had otherwise. So I think more schools to educate young men of color, whether that is a single sex education model. And I'll say lastly, with the work that we're doing also, we have an Eagle Institute, and we train educators, school districts, teachers on how to sophisticate, you know, their work with young men of color in their schools, right? So I think if there's more funding dedicated to educators on how to do the work to educate young men of color, that can help to, you know, close a gap tremendously in what we're seeing in the school to prison pipeline trajectory that has been rampant, you know, for decades now.
I have to, again, agree with you, because I went to Jackson State, I love, and we just shout them out.
Yeah, I
met quite a few young men who were from Philly, Chicago, Detroit, and their whole narrative was, my mother sent me so that I could have a second chance. My mother sent me because I was getting into trouble. And so Jackson State was this place of not only, as you said, education, that was first, but nurturing and trying to shape you into something different.
Absolutely.
And in fact, some of my colleagues or my friends, you know, now, they never went back to Chicago or Detroit or Philly, because they came to Jackson State. It was a safe cocoon, and they could be who they need to be. You know what I'm saying? And there were other, what I'm trying to say, there were other role models and coaches and professors who were Black men who were like, you know, you're going to get down here and straighten up. And so even today in 2020, when I talk to my students and stuff, it's the same narrative. My mother sent me to Clark, Atlanta, because I was hanging around the wrong crew, or I was getting into trouble. And they come to Atlanta. It's like, you know, and when they talk to me, they say the same thing. It's like, you know, I said, it's so funny. I was in school as an undergrad years ago, and your conversation is the same one. I know it's the same conversation.
Yeah, that's so beautiful.
Your parents or your grandparents or whatever is saying, hey, go to school down south at this Black institution.
Yes.
And we're going to keep you safe, because you don't need to be around the knuckleheads you're running with back on the streets of Chicago. Whether it was Tuskegee, Hampton, Howard, Clark, Atlanta, Jackson State, Tougaloo, it made a difference. And so
it made a difference. That's right.
It made a difference in how our Black young men and our Black young women were shaped.
Absolutely.
Usually with the young women, I will say that it doesn't take much to kind of get them on track.
It doesn't.
Usually
It's the
My
brothers.
young men. It's the brothers. And it's the whole, hey, what's up? And no. You're going to be a scholar. You're going to pull your pants up. You're not going to wear the wife beaters.
Right.
We're going to have a discussion. I'm going to talk to you like you're a young adult and a young man, because I am your professor. I am your elder at this point.
Right.
So, and I can appreciate what you're saying, because the work that you're doing at the Eagle Academy, that needs to be instituted at almost every Black institution there is in the nation, because these young men who are coming into the Black institutions need that guidance. They need a mentorship, because let's be real, some of them do not have a Black male figure in their life. They don't have a father or an uncle or a brother who's telling them, this is what you need to do. And the streets are.
I agree.
Let's just cut out all the nonsense and be real. And so when they come to school and it's like, okay, I'm dealing with this professor who's getting on my case. I'm getting on your case because I expect more of you. I expect more of you than you expect of yourself.
Absolutely.
Whether it's in education, how you carry yourself, because when you leave a Black institution, you reflect me. Not the whole institution, but you reflect me when you walk out of my class.
Right. That's right.
So when you talk about this nurturing environment, this cocoon of safety, this idea that these Black males or brown males need this mentorship, that's the truth of the matter. Because they will not get anywhere without it, because they come to an HBCU, for example, and now it's, what do I do? How do I act? I expect you to come to my class and conduct yourself in a professional manner. I expect that you will converse with me in a professional manner. I understand where you came from, and I tell them all the time, I said, I understand this idea of what's up, what's lit. That's in our community. That's not the surrounding community.
Right.
You know what? You feel me?
I know exactly what you're saying.
And so when you talk about having these groups of young Black men who have achieved something, it's almost as if we need to streamline our Black and brown young males to be in these programs, because we know the end result is success. It will not be the prison pipeline. It will not be, they end up in a cemetery, so to speak. Because as I tell them all day, every young man who comes into the world is not meant to be a rapper, a ball player. There's only one Master P. There's only one P. Diddy.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's only one Michael Jordan.
Yes. I wanna just I don't know how much time we have left, but I wanna drive home again just some of my just a couple of additional points in terms of school. I've been so when I finished undergrad and while I was pursuing my double master's, I was working for the Florida Department of Education as an educational consultant and researcher, and specifically I did work with low performance schools in the state of Florida. So I was in the dropout prevention program. And what I discovered, Dr. Hill, very early in 2006, me being at the Florida DOE, my spirit spoke to me that, I am to establish schools. And it was a class, a course that I took in my last semester in my master's program in the public administration, that I realized I was very fascinated by boarding schools. And so the work that I'm looking to do in the next, 3 to 5 years is to continue to explore school models for young men of color. I really believe in my heart of hearts that boarding school models, I know that there's a lot of complications, a lot of funding challenges with them, but provided that there were some, are some angel investors who believe in the model, I plan to, really have some of the world's greatest, boarding school models for young men of color and young women of color, because I believe those models, more than independent schools, public, private, charter, they better guarantee that the inputs that you're trying to inject and instill in our young men and men of color are actually going to stick, right? Because even if you go to that best public school, you don't know what the child is going back home to on a regular basis, right? And so there's a lot of unpacking that I continue to see, unraveling rather, that I continue to see even when the best teacher is in front of that student. And so this work that I've been so blessed to be a part of, being a consultant for Eagle Academy through my company has allowed me to see, again, what the best models for educational trajectories for young men of color looks like. And so, I mean, for me, I'm looking to really have conversations with people about the boarding school model. And if we stay in the public school route, I'm definitely preaching, that there needs to be more funding for single sex education. And then lastly, more funding for, co-ed schools who have a population of young men of color that they care about. And how do we continue to put, resources to support those models as well?
And what you're saying makes complete sense, because just in the, 2019 when I graduated, it was tremendous to see a brother who's a millionaire or billionaire give back to Morehouse and say, you know what, I'm going to pay off all your loans so you can pay it forward, so that you walk out without this debt, clear, free and clear. And so, and to your point, it makes sense, because we need to have more structures like that, because we want to have this generational wealth of African Americans. We want to have this educational leap of scholars who are able to go out and say, I can take this on, or I can do this, or yes, I developed this invention, because we have to be acknowledged. And I think with young Black men and young Black women, we have to keep putting our best foot forward in terms of them coming to our educational institutions, the careers that they choose, because again, some of them are being influenced by what they see on Instagram, social media, and that's just not real life.
It's not real life.
It's not real life.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is your definition of Black and brown male achievement? If you could put it and summarize it in one sentence, what is your definition for Black and brown male achievement?
Dr. Hill, these are hard questions. Let me think. I would say,
this is what you do. And
I know. I do know that. So
you know it.
I would say having a profound sense of self. I would say it means to be rooted in one's culture, and like one's racial and ethnic culture, and being able to also understand how he understands the ways to move throughout the world, right? In context of his culture. And I would also say, lastly, Black and brown male achievement means to, have the effective and efficient tools to learn. And so it's my philosophy, which I, usually inject when I'm educating, young men of color, is to have the cycle of learning, unlearning, and relearning.
That's deep. That's deep. I think about, unfortunately, the passing of Chadwick Boseman, and some of my students are talking about him, and they're saying he was a king in and outside of being an actor. And this idea that he played these roles that were so influential in our culture, James Brown and Jackie Robinson. And so being deeply rooted in your culture does provide you with that sense of identity. And I think when you attend HBCU, you get that part of you. Does that make sense? So
it makes perfect sense.
Part of you, you're able to function. And even though Wakanda is a fictional environment, or whatever it may be in the Super Marvel universe, it portrayed a picture of Black excellence and the possibilities of what you can do and where you can go.
Yeah.
So when you talk about Black and brown male achievement, that's what I think of, because at the end of the day, we have to correlate these experiences, right?
Absolutely.
Because we've been blessed to do so much beyond whatever our grandfathers or great grandfathers or great aunties thought. We have been so blessed to go so far beyond that. And when I hear you speak about your educational experiences and what you're giving back to the community and how you're inspiring young Black men and young brown men, it makes sense, because if you don't give back, then who leads the next generation?
Who leads? Perfect sense, Dr. Hill. Perfect sense. Yeah, couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more.
So I have a couple last questions. Why did you join BDN? In what ways has it enhanced your professional career?
Absolutely. So, Dr. Maurice Green is probably one of the most influential, brothers in my life. And we met at the earlier stages of me being in New York City. I believe we met about 2011. And so, we were at a networking event and, we connected, on a lot of different fronts and we stayed in touch. And I had the privilege of, just supporting a vision that, was given to him, and I know it was a divine vision that was given to him. And so I was privileged, to support the early stages, of what BDN was going to look like. So by default of me being connected, with my big bro, I was definitely on the BDN bandwagon. Professionally and personally, it has been a beautiful part of my life, because again, you realize that you are nestled in a community of other thinkers and creators and curators. And so back to what I said earlier in terms of that exceptionalism factor, if you're not careful as a person of color who's been the only Black person in the gifted program, the only Black person in your at job, at work, and on these corporate boards, and on and on and on, you can get to a place of self-isolation. You can also begin to think you might be better than your people. It could go so many different ways depending on, again, a person's disposition. So when I think about BDN and you're around, PhD physicists and people who have their PhD and all these other things, you realize, you're common, right? But
You're not alone. You're not isolated.
You're not alone, and there's other people who are doing what you're doing. And so for me, it's like a superpower. It's a superpower knowing that I am connected to thousands, of other people just like me. So when you see me, I come with a legion, with the army of people ready to squad up and like, what we talking? What's up?
Yeah, because you don't, and like you said, that isolation, because no matter where you land academically, it does happen. And so being a part of BDN, it's like, okay, I'm not abnormal. There are other people who think like me, who look like me, because those experiences are a part of your academia, depending on where you land, you know what I'm saying, and professionally. And so even in the wake of everything that has happened this summer, there's been a lot of talk about things. And so I believe that BDN is a space where we can dissect those ideas and dissect those statements that have been made about the betterment of the academic community for all. But I have to agree with you in the sense that it does make me feel comfortable to come to a place and say, okay, I'm not strange, I'm not abnormal.
Yeah.
You understand exactly what I am stating.
Yes.
And this is what's important to our community and what we have to push forward for our students to be successful.
Absolutely.
So I think that is right in line with what I think all day, every day. So lastly, what are your thoughts on encouraging other promising scholars to join BDN? Because as you talked about, you met this brother, he brought you in, and it's been a great experience. So how do you perceive the process of, hey, this is what you need to do. If you're an undergraduate or graduate scholar, this is an organization that you need to be a part of.
So yeah, that's a great question. Great last question. So we know we are always trying to recruit, other scholars of color to be a part of BDN. So I love that we are ending on this note. So if there are any of you who are listening, that are, in the undergraduate programs, who are in graduate programs, and even if you're scholars, who are not connected to this network, I would strongly encourage you to join BDN because, once again, it's important to to be rooted in community. I mean, I think as people of color, you know, we are meant to be collective. We are collective beings. We are not individualistic creatures by any means. And so, you know, I want to empower you all, encourage you that, you know, there is tremendous power to be connected with other people who look like you, and not necessarily who just look like you, but who have the same spirit and are doing the types of things that you're doing. I will also say that, you know, it's important for you to be able to be in a community that will allow you to think about what your research means for the people that also look like you. I think if you're talking to scholars of color and they can help you translate, you know, from a practical perspective, which that's been my experience of how my research can be actualized, you know, in very powerful ways. I also say practically, you know, being connected to BDN, it turbocharges your professional trajectory. So, you know, you get leads to, you know, different, you know, research positions and posts. People who have had fellowships, you know, with one organization, they are credible messengers, right? I think a lot of times, Dr. Hill, we think it's all about getting information from a mentor, someone that's older than you. I am a recipient of even having my peers put me on to information and resources, perhaps in ways that are even more powerful than some of my mentors, right? And so again, I cannot understate, you know, or overstate the value of getting plugged into a community. It cuts down on the time that you would be spending by yourself trying to figure it out. You got too many things to be thinking about with your life than trying to figure out every single thing. So allow this community in the Black Doctoral Network to help, you know, alleviate some of that stress. And you will be nestled in a community of love, of nurturance and guidance, and just the finest intellectual acumen that you have ever and will ever come across. So that's my shameless, not so shameless plug, Dr. Hill, and that's all I got for tonight.
That's all you got for tonight? Okay, so we're gonna keep it 100. We're going to thank Dr. Garner for his not only explosive and very formidable responses, but the fact that he participated in our podcast tonight. Let's tell the people how they can find you and what you have coming up.
Absolutely. So donaldgarner.com will be up and running in the next 30 days. So be on the lookout for that. I'll blast that out on my social media. But for right now, you can find me on social media as well as Twitter at DC Garner. DC Garner. Follow me. I have a lot of exciting things forthcoming, you know, looking, Dr. Hill, to get into the academy very, very soon. I'm getting, you know, back into my creative spaces. So I've launched an entertainment company and plan to be writing a lot of content around, you know, my people being in the South. So I'm excited to, now that this PhD is behind me, you know, I can really, you know, get into a lot of creative things that I've always wanted to do. So, yeah.
I'm excited for you. You have a lot on your table or your plate. And being from the South, I'm interested and intrigued about your stories because we know people from the South are extremely colorful and they tell it like a TI is. Because my experiences with HBCUs has been very colorful, and you know, when people say, well, what happened, I just say yes ma'am and yes sir and nod my head. I'm understand.
I'm telling you.
You understand. But we have loved having you here, and thank you so much for participating and taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. Again, he's giving you his information. Look him up, like, subscribe, whatever you need to do, and follow Dr. Donald Garner. And I thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hill.